Hey everyone, welcome back to Falcons Central Radio Show on the Pro Football Central Radio Network. I'm Aaron Freeman of FalcFans.com, joined by my good friend and co-host Scott Karasik at the Falcoholic. We are back after a week off to talk about the Atlanta Falcons as we usually do on this podcast. We got a lot of news to update you guys on. We're going to talk about the coaching and front office changes we've seen over the last few days. We'll talk about two new additions to the Falcons, to the Pro Bowl roster from the Falcons roster. We will talk about some injury news that we've gotten in the last week or so. We will talk about Roddy White's future status and whether Dan Quinn gave him a vote of confidence earlier today or yesterday in his press conference. And as usual, we will answer all you guys' mailbag questions at the end of the show. All right, Scott, we got a lot of stuff to sift through tonight. Let's start with some of these, the big moves, I guess, which is the coaching and the front office changes. We saw, this grabbed headlines with the Falcons announcing that Raheem Morris was going to move from defensive passing game coordinator to wide receivers coach to replace Terry Robisky, who took over the offensive coordinator spot in Tennessee under his old friend Mike Mularkey. We hired a new defensive passing game coordinator, that is Jerome Henderson, the former Cowboys secondary coach. So I'll give you the floor, Scott, and weigh in on what are your thoughts on all of these moves.
I kind of like the idea of Morris being that kind of passing game consultant / wide receivers coach for the offense, because you get an idea that he's going to use his expertise from the defensive side of the ball and say, hey, this was what I hated to see teams do against my defenses. I hated to see teams run this concept, or I hated to see teams run that concept. So let's run these concepts because I hated them. So I think it's going to work out at least positively for a little bit. He doesn't really know wide receiver technique that well, but I hate to say it this way, with Roddy White, with Julio Jones as the real leaders of that group, and I think Roddy's staying for a while as kind of that coach / player. The Falcons are going to keep him, but they're basically going to be like, all right, you're staying here, and then once you retire, you're the wide receivers coach. I could see that happening very, very, very likely for that to happen.
Okay.
Well, think about it. If Roddy retires, right? But he's like, well, I want to come back and do something. They're going to use him as a wide receivers coach, and he knows what he's doing. He's learned from some pretty good receivers coaches. Well, not the early part of his career with George Foster or whatever the hell that guy was.
George Stewart.
Yeah, George, the offensive guard that was teaching wide receivers. That to me is stupid.
He's done a decent job in Minnesota. Stephon Diggs wasn't hurt by him being his coach. Neither was Percy Harvin.
Those guys didn't improve from the guys they were beforehand. They just stayed where they were. Stephon Diggs was always this good in college. He just found a quarterback that could throw him the damn ball, which he didn't have in college.
Okay.
I'm just saying. And then Terry Robisky is one of the best of all time. But if you've got a guy who's a defensive backs coach and says, hey, I hated when receivers would do this to me. Hey, I hated when receivers would do this to me. And who was basically a safety when he was at Hofstra. Like, I think that makes a lot of sense. Because I think you're going to see a guy who goes, hey, this technique really turned me around all the time. Let's teach this.
All right. That's a lot to sort of take. I know a lot of people were confused by this. I don't think it's that big a deal with Morris taking over wide. It's not like he's a defensive line coach taking over the quarterback coach or anything like that. He's been a defensive back. He was a defensive back at Hofstra. He was defensive backs coach pretty much outside of like those 3 years he was head coach of Tampa Bay and maybe a year as a defensive coordinator in college or something like that. He's been a defensive back, so it's not as if he is completely foreign to what wide receivers do. I think a lot of what playing wide receiver in the NFL, contrary to popular opinion, where most people tend to focus on speed and hands, it's really about reading coverages and adjusting your coverages, adjusting your routes based off of those coverages. And I think because of Raheem Moore's experience playing the defensive back, I think he'll help benefit those guys a lot. I don't necessarily feel like Julio Jones and Justin Hardy need a ton of work on their route running. I think, those things can be refined, but I don't feel like Raheem Morris lacks the expertise to sort of refine, particularly Hardy. We already know Julio Jones is fine. And so, I guess probably now with Raheem Morris, you probably won't see the Falcons draft any super, super raw wide receivers like a Sammy Coates type of player and sort of ask him to sort of mold him like they might ask a guy like Terry Robisky to do. So, I'm in favor of the move. I don't feel like you need, some sort of expert level wide receivers coach to get the most out of it. I think a lot of that stuff tends to get overblown in the NFL. You have Raheem Morris. You had 2 offensive assistants. Mike McDaniel's been a wide receivers coach. I'm going to assume that he'll, as a quality control coach, he'll probably take a little bit more of a vested interest in the wide receiver group. Losing Terry Robisky, he was well respected, long time wide receivers coach. But, I think if people may or may not recall, but when we were talking last year about when we hired Dan Quinn, whether or not Robisky sort of needed to come back, I was one of those people that was like, take him or leave him. It's not as if he gets a lot of credit for developing guys that I don't think not to say that I'm some sort of expert, but I don't think he really deserves all the credit that he gets for developing. Like Julio Jones was pretty much a ready-made product when he came out of college. He was going to be Julio Jones regardless of who was coaching him. I could have coached him and he still would have been great. Maybe 10% less than what he wound up being. Roddy White's development really wasn't due to Terry Robisky. It was due to Paul Petrino and Joe Horn and those guys in 2007. And then Harry Douglas kind of never really improved over the course of his career to any significant degree. And then pretty much other than those 3 guys, you don't really sit there and say Terry Robisky helped develop this guy, because pretty much every other receiver he's ever coached that played in a Falcon uniform is out of the league and was out of the league pretty quickly after they left Atlanta. So, I guess maybe that's a testament to Robisky that they were competent enough to make the Falcons roster while he was here. But, I don't feel like, suddenly the Falcons are doomed, basically, long story short. And Henderson, I think he'll be an upgrade in the secondary. Everything I heard about him, he's a good coach. Seems to work pretty well with corners. He can certainly claim helping develop guys like Revis and Joe Hayden. Byron Jones did a pretty good job moving to safety this past year. So I feel like the coaching changes are all good moves. And, I don't necessarily feel like people need to be distraught over these. They're position coaches. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter all that much. Ultimately, teams kind of go by where their head coach and their coordinators are, not really who their position coaches are.
I think you can make an argument that Tony Gonzalez had more of an impact than Terry Robisky did. Because Roddy White really didn't have – don't get me wrong, Roddy White was great in 2008. He was great in 2007. But he really didn't take that step into being that true top 4 or 5 receiver for the 3 years that he was one until Tony Gonzalez came in and they started working out after practice on things. And you saw Roddy adjust his option routes different ways. You saw him understanding that, hey, when the defense calls this, I'm going to run here. And I thought that had more to do with it than Robisky, honestly.
Yeah. I mean, I think ultimately a lot of it is a collaborative process. It's, Roddy improves because he's getting better quarterback play, because of the presence of veterans like Tony Gonzalez, not only on the field and off the field. Who the play calling gets better, he learns the offense. It's just basically a lot of factors. And I think people tend to want to whittle these things down to, it's this one coach or this one veteran player or this one thing that is the reason why someone is successful. And it's not really. It's like 12 different factors that all play, and you can sort of maybe rank them. This one was the biggest factor or whatnot. But I think one position coach change is not going to tear down the world. It's not like I can't think of an example of some great Alex Gibbs or anything like that. These sort of Hall of Fame position coaches. But hey, let's talk about some of the front office moves. The Falcons made some waves today by hiring 2 former GMs. Once again, this seemed to be that Falcons Twitter was not too thrilled with this, but I guess this is just the nature of Falcons Twitter, complaining about.
This may be the one thing that we actually agree on, though.
Probably.
I feel like we were both defending this move. Like, hold on. These guys rose up to GM because of their prowess as scouts. They failed as GM because they couldn't hire coaches and couldn't manage the cap. They're not going to be asked to do either of those things back as scouts again. What's the problem?
Yeah, it's like people think, because, like Phil Emery, probably his worst draft pick was taking Shea McClellan in the first round in 2012. And, it's like people think, Phil Emery's going to come in Atlanta and the Falcons are going to reach on another Shea McClellan type of guy, in the first round or something like that. And it's like, no, that's not going to happen. He's just he's going to help, scout guys. He's going to watch as a national scout, essentially, he'll be sort of responsible for having an overarching view of all the players. So basically you have him and Webster. They may not watch tape of, 700 guys or anything like that, but they'll basically, the guys that the area scouts sort of say, we really like this guy. I'm like, okay, let me get eyes on him and let me check him out. But I mean, at the end of the day, it's just basically 2 more voices in that room when they start making up their draft board. And it's not as if somehow one of these 2 guys is going to come in and, completely derail the Falcons draft process. Most of that stuff is already done. It's just about finalizing things. And that's all they'll lend their expertise at that. And that's all it is. It's basically the Falcons are shuffling in new middle management. They didn't hire a new CEO of the company. It's just middle management guys that will help out.
Well, the thing is, I think the Alshon Jeffrey pick, like the very next round, that pretty much forgives the Shea McClellan pick.
Yeah,
getting Alshon Jeffrey 45th. Huh?
And then he got Kyle Long the next year, so it's not as if he's like terrible at drafting.
Well, yeah, no, he got Alshon Jeffrey, and then Brandon Harden fell out of the league the first year, but that was his first draft as a GM too. Like, you can't get that mad about a guy for his first draft as a GM. He's still kind of learning what's going on, and I mean, not everybody's going to hit on them the way Dimitroff did, but Emery did have one of his best years, or Dimitroff did have one of his best years with Emery on the staff back in 2008. Yeah. It's not like the Falcons are saying, oh, hey, we're taking these 2 failed GMs. No, it's the Falcons saying, hey, we're taking 2 guys that Rich McKay likes, that scouted under Rich McKay for years, and that Pioli likes in Rushton Webster.
Mm-hmm.
Or, no, sorry, Phil Emery.
Yeah.
Phil Emery. That Pioli likes in Emery. And we're bringing them in and saying, we want you guys to do what you do best. You're going to scout. I don't understand why bringing in 2 very good football minds is a bad idea. And I'm sitting here looking at Phil Emery's track record. Kyle Fuller, Ego Ferguson, Will Sutton, all three of those starters in the first 3 picks. Kadeem Carey and Brock Vereen have been good depth players for that team. Pat O'Donnell, he drafted a punter in the 6th round. You know me and punters in the 6th round, unless they're going to be like starting every game no matter what. And they're, for whatever reason, Miami always has good punters. So Pat O'Donnell's been their Michael Bosher. They're Matt Bosher. And then Charles Leno, a 7th-round pick, who's been a pretty solid player. Marquess Wilson, a 7th-round pick who's contributed. And here's the thing. His 7th and 6th-round picks stick and stay on the team. You're not sitting here looking at these guys and going, oh, this guy sucks. This guy doesn't really do anything. This guy kind of sucks. Like, oh, okay, this guy was depth. This guy was depth. This guy was depth. Worst case scenario, you're picking a guy in the 6th round to be your backup quarterback.
Okay. Yeah, I got nothing else to add to that. Let's move on to talk a little bit about the new Falcon Pro Bowlers. We talked about this a little bit when the Pro Bowl announcements were released last month, but I guess finally, because of people ducking out, because basically all the Pro Bowlers were on the Broncos or Panthers this year, so a bunch of spots opened up. 2 of them were for Desmond Trufant and Patrick DeMarco. And so now they were formerly alternates, and now they'll be playing in the Pro Bowl, so that gives the Falcons 4. If you have been living under a rock for the last month, then you probably didn't hear that Julio Jones and Devontae Freeman are also in the Pro Bowl. Devontae Freeman is a captain for Team Irvin, I think. I can't remember which team it is. But
Devontae Freeman is a captain with Geno Atkins.
Yeah. So, if you guys are into the Pro Bowl, then, check it out. You'll see 4 Falcons in that game. So you got anything else to add to this, Scott, that you didn't say a month ago?
Not really. Just glad that Devontae Freeman's such a feel-good story that you're like, man, I'm so happy that he's the Pro Bowl captain. Like, 4th-round pick, back up behind Steven Jackson last year, because Mike Smith didn't really know what he had. And then Bobby Turner goes, oh, I know exactly what I have. And the Falcons move to his zone blocking scheme, and he shows out. I love it.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about some of these injury updates. We heard that Vic Beasley will not have surgery on the torn labrum that was bothering him last season. Apparently that dates back to his last year at Clemson. That's a shoulder issue. Won't have surgery on it. I guess he's going to let it heal naturally, which I guess won't be that big a deal. And we also heard that Devin Hester is expected to be out 3 to 6 months because he had surgery on that toe that kept him out for like 3/4 of last season. I guess, and with Hester in particular, that's going to be interesting because he's kind of on the roster bubble going into the offseason. He could be a guy that the Falcons cut because, they want to get younger or whatever. What are your sort of thoughts on either one of those injuries, and particularly Hester's? What does that do, or does it help or hurt his chances of sticking?
I think it hurts his chances of sticking. I didn't think he was coming back anyway, just because $3 million for a kick returner who plays 5-6 games and doesn't really provide that much more over Eric Weems when he's got a bum toe. And it's still going to be an issue next year, even after the surgery, because it takes a while to recover from turf toe. Like, Deion Sanders had to take 2 years off to fully recover from turf toe. What do you think Devin Hester's going to need? So, for me, personally, I don't think Devin Hester's going to be a Falcon in 2016 unless he really just somehow magically recovers.
Okay. Well, I'm kind of with you, Scott, on that. I would like to see Devin Hester get one more shot in Atlanta. I still think he has something left in the tank, and I think this last season was kind of wiped out by the injury. And obviously, this next upcoming season could be similar circumstances. You hope that this surgery fixes the problem, but you never know with turf toe. It is an issue. I myself had turf toe back when I was in college, a long time ago. And I didn't really shake it until about 2 years. It took me most of 2 years to really shake it. But, I didn't have, I just let it heal, try to let it heal naturally, and it didn't really. So, yeah, I guess we'll see what Hester can do. I would like to see Hester get another shot in the league, whether it's in Atlanta or elsewhere, and sort of pad his record total with the touchdowns. If it's not in Atlanta, hopefully it won't be for a team we play this year. So I wish him the best. If this is the last we'll see of Devin Hester in the NFL or in that Falcons uniform, then I salute him for an outstanding career, and I do hope he does wind up in the Hall of Fame as a special teams player when it's all said and done. All right. Let's talk about Roddy White. Now, Scott, you talked about Roddy White's chances of coming back. It was interesting yesterday, and when Dan Quinn announced the coaching changes, he talked about Roddy White's leadership and how Roddy White was excited about working with Raheem Morris and, classic sort of coach speak. And on the surface, it did seem like that was basically Dan Quinn saying that Roddy White was going to be back in Atlanta. I kind of flipped out on Twitter for a little bit over this news. People who are regular listeners to the show probably know where I stand on whether or not Roddy White should be back in Atlanta. But I did think it was interesting what we saw with Vaughn McClure write an article either yesterday or today talking about that very subject of Roddy White's status with the team. And I thought it was interesting that what Dan Quinn really said was that Roddy was under contract now, as opposed to basically saying unequivocally Roddy is going to be a Falcon in 2016. I think it was very delicate how Dan Quinn handled that. Maybe I'm reading a little bit too much into it, but it does seem like, there's still the open possibility, if not probability, that Roddy White will not be a Falcon in 2016. What are your thoughts in addition to what you said earlier on that?
I still don't think that he gets cut. I think what they're saying is, hey, we want Roddy to come back, but we want him to maybe take a pay cut, maybe take a restructure. We're not going to say it outright, but we're going to say it behind closed doors. And if he doesn't, then we may have no choice. Especially if Phil Emery and his boy Alshon, not saying Alshon does or does not get allowed to walk, but hypothetically speaking, if Alshon Jeffrey is available this offseason and you have a chance to go with either Alshon Jeffrey or Roddy White, I know what I'm doing.
Well, yeah, I think that is a no-brainer with Alshon Jeffrey, but, as I've probably said before, there's no chance that Alshon Jeffrey doesn't get franchise tagged. I mean, he would have, had he played a full season, he would have had like 120 catches this year. He had like something like 60 catches in like 7 games this year. Something ridiculous like that. So he would have put up like not numbers on the same level as Julio, but he would have been in the top 5 receivers. And, had Kevin White played this year and been great this year, maybe there was a chance the Bears would let Alshon Jeffrey go. But, maybe they don't think about giving him a long-term contract because of Kevin White's presence. But I think there's zero chance that Alshon Jeffrey is not franchise tagged at the very least. As I've said before, as to Roddy White, To me, it makes no sense to keep him. I just don't understand why an organization would keep a soon to be 35-year-old wide receiver. He'll be 35, I think, in November, who counts, $6 or $7 million against the salary cap, has shown a steady decline over the last 4 years. Each year he's been worse than he was the year before. So when you have that sort of steady pattern over a 4-year period, what do you think is going to happen in year 5? Like, you think he's going to get faster at age 35 than he was at age 34 or 33 or 32? Like, that doesn't make any sense. When you're really being honest, I know injuries have played a huge factor into it, but outside of 5 games in 2013 and maybe 2 or 3 games over the last 2 seasons, Roddy White has not contributed at all to this offense, really. He's had like 8 good games over the last 3 years. Like, I don't understand why you would keep him. Like, I don't understand why people want to push guys like Durant and Moore and whoever else at the door, but want to keep Roddy White. Like, he's not contributing to this team. Like, what his role for this team in the future is basically as a slot receiver, which is the same role that Justin Hardy has. And I think you can say, based off of watching tape from 2015, Justin Hardy can do everything right now that Roddy White can do, and arguably better. So to me, if you keep Roddy White, you're just holding back Justin Hardy. You're not going to be able to maximize both of those guys on the roster. And why would you care about maximizing a 35-year-old receiver? Roddy's had a great career in Atlanta, not taking anything away from him. He's been an outstanding Falcon, but he's done. And to me, it would be extremely frustrating to me to see this coaching staff or this front office or whoever making the decision to keep him, because this is the same symptomatic problem that this team has suffered through for years and years and years. And one of the big reasons why I'm so critical of Thomas Dimitroff, they can't look at their own roster and identify the problems. Like, Roddy White is done. He's done. Like, it's obvious. I don't see why it's even a matter of debate. He's done as a starting receiver. He had one of the worst seasons as a starting receiver in the last decade. He started 16 games, caught 41 passes. I think there's maybe been 2 wide receivers since 2005 that have started 15 or more games and caught less than 41 passes. I think one of them was Donald Driver when he was 36, and the very next year I think he caught 8 passes, something like that. And he was retired. Green Bay kept him on as a status symbol. Like, oh, we still love Donald Driver. He's such a tough and gutsy veteran, but he basically rode the bench that entire last year before he retired. To me, that's basically the same point in Roddy White's career where he's at. Cut him loose, move on, get better at that position. And to me, it's a no-brainer decision. And this team can't make basic decisions like that, then I think they're destined to fail. This regime, this coaching staff, if they just can't make basic decisions like that, then why would we be confident that they can make good decisions? So that's how I feel about it. Said a mouthful. You got anything to add, Scott, before we get into these mailbag questions?
I mean, not really. I was kind of expecting you to go off on the Roddy White take. So.
Okay. All right. Well, I mean, I don't see the reason to talk that much more about Roddy White in the next couple of weeks until he's cut. So, yeah, let's get into these mailbag questions. First one comes from Evan Birchfield. He says, Scott, how many times did the Falcons cross your mind while you were sailing away on your cruise?
Oh, man. Maybe once. And it was like, man, when I get off this cruise, I got to write that article for Dave. That was maybe once.
Yeah, I was looking forward to taking a vacation from the Falcons in this month, and that didn't happen. So I'm a little envious of you, Scott. I've maybe had one day where I've not had to think about the Falcons, or they haven't crossed my mind. So maybe I'll check out probably Thursday. Maybe, I don't know. All right, our next question comes from Agent 45, and he asks, how many GMs does it take to screw in a light bulb?
Oh, just one. The Falcons just need more than one light bulb screwed in on this team.
There you go. I got nothing else to add to that. All right. Next question comes from Steve in Brooklyn. He says, question for you, Aaron. What would Thomas Dimitrov have to do in order to restore your faith in him? Basically not do anything. Look, my faith is probably irrevocably, whatever that word is, whatever. I'll never have fully faith in him. But basically, all he has to do is just not do anything for like the next 3 or 4 years and watch as the Falcons have good off seasons. You know, I feel like he had 4 bad off seasons. So if the Falcons have 4 good off seasons, then I think it sort of balances it out for him to make up for those years. So I guess basically not screw up for the next 3 years. He got 1 in under his belt last year, so he's got 3 more to do. And I guess that answers your question, Steve. Evan Birchfield's second question is, it seems like everyone we hire has some connection to Quinn or Dimitrov. Is this a bad thing when it seems like they may be hiring based off of familiarity / friendship instead of purely on talent or skill?
Welcome to how the NFL works. It's a buddy system. It's a good old boy system. If you don't break in with a certain guy who's going to believe in you, you will never get into the NFL as a coach, ever. It's all about who's my friend that can coach defensive backs, my friend that can coach wide receivers, my friend that can coach this. And then the only other way that you do get hired is you make a name for yourself the way Terry Robisky did, the way Mike Tice did, the way, Alex Gibbs did, as some of these legendary coaches for their positions. These guys are known as some of the best of the best.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about that is Mike Tice worked with Mike Smith in Jacksonville. Terry Robisky worked with Mike Mularkey in Miami. So when they hired Mike Mularkey, it was like, hey, this other really good receivers coach, you should bring him along. And it's like, yeah, I'll do that. Scott's right. It's a who you know than a what you know sort of business, whether you're a coach, whether you're a scout. I mean, you can sort of get some low-level jobs if you're not sort of as a new guy, but you kind of have to know somebody that has an in, like, you're some graduate assistant at, Penn State, and then, James Franklin makes a couple of calls for you, and it's like, oh, yeah. And then they're like, hey, we heard you been a hard worker. You go in for an interview, and if you blow them away in an interview, then maybe you get to be an offensive quality control coach or some intern or something like that, and then work your way up eventually from there. But it is one of those things where coaches tend to hire the people that they know. GMs tend to hire the people that they know. With few exceptions. The interesting thing is Kyle Shanahan wasn't someone that Dan Quinn had worked with a lot before, but I guess, he liked his body of work and brought him into Atlanta. And so that's probably more the exception than the rule. But generally speaking, you're going to see this moving forward. Yeah. All right. We got a question from the Colorado Falcon. He asked this last week. We missed it, and so we will answer it now. Any thoughts on signing Jason Pierre-Paul?
If the Falcons can sign Jason Pierre-Paul, they should. But I don't really see a way that he's available this offseason. Just because the Giants need a lot, and I don't see any way that they get rid of Pierre-Paul. But if he's out there, he's available, you might as well try to get him.
Yeah. I think this to me is another player that I think is going to get tagged, because I think that what the Giants' pass rush was atrocious last year until JPP came back. And while he only ended up, I think, with 1 sack last year, he got a lot of pressures. And you go back and you watch some of those second half of the season Giants games, the speed and the quickness are still there with JPP. It's just a question of that hand, whether or not he can sort of do the moves and use the hands and technique that he's used to. But I do think from the Giants' perspective, at least, they're thinking, okay, he had this gruesome hand injury, came back from it in like 4 months. Let's see where he's going to be if he has 16 months to come back from it and recover from it. So I think it makes perfect sense for their perspective to tag him, see what he is this year, and then if he has a good season, looks like JPP of old, then they'll give him a long-term contract. If he does become available, I think the Falcons do have to look hard at him. I think he would be a great addition to playing opposite Vic Beasley on the right side. Because that injury, I think it's to his right hand. I don't think it is as big a deal if he plays on the right side because he can use his left arm to sort of do whatever. I think if he does become available, then he immediately shoots to the top of the list as one of the best pass rushers available in this offseason. And I think if you can, if you don't have to spend $80 million to get him, you go out and get him. But I have heard things from other people outside, rumors and stuff, where one of the reasons why the Giants haven't paid him yet is because there's this belief that he's the type of guy that once you pay him, he'll kind of shut it down. And certainly the whole 4th of July stuff doesn't help in that regard, in terms of whether you trust his decision-making and all that stuff. So there is a little bit of a buyer's beware with JPP. So, you don't want to give him a bunch of guaranteed money if you can help it.
I think it's very possible that JPP could be a situation like what Cliff Averill was or what Michael Bennett was the year that they were free agents. Everybody looked at them and said, hey, these guys are going to get paid $10+ million. These guys are going to be great. But it was the year after the Ray Edwards situation in Atlanta, and both of those guys kind of had that Ray Edwards feel to them. So they got prove-it deals. And they both proved it, but they had to be given those deals first.
Mm-hmm.
They had to get that 1 year, $4 million, that 2 year, $8 million deal. And JPP may be kind of in that same situation. He's got a mangled hand. He's got an attitude that that's what he's known for right now. And at 27 years old, he can't really be known for that kind of attitude. But I could see Dan Quinn going, hey, that's the kind of guy I want on my team. I'm going to bring him in. I'm going to reform him. I've got this. And the Falcons going out there and, maybe he signs a 1 year, $6 million deal, which everybody in Atlanta would love. No matter who you are, I would love it. I don't care if you fully guarantee that thing for injury and stupidity and whatever else you want to guarantee it for. A 1 year, $6 million deal to get JPP across from Vic Beasley would be fun. You'd use him as a Leo. You'd use him as, in the rotation. Because why not put him in rotation and not have him play 100% of the snaps? I don't think Michael Bennett plays 100% of the snaps out in Seattle, even still. He plays like 70, 75%. And that was high in the rotation.
Yeah.
I think Averill plays like 60 to 65% of the snaps. So I think between like those two guys, they play like 140% of the snaps between two spots. So really 70% of the total snaps. And you got other guys rotating in. Why not do something like that with JPP? Why not have him play 60, 65% of the snaps, rotate him in? That way you don't really have to motivate him for 70 snaps a game. You only got to motivate him for 40.
Yeah. Yeah, and the thing is, before his hand injury, he was a great run defender. So, the questions of whether he could be an every down player, it certainly wouldn't be there. And I should say, I don't know anything about JP. I've just heard people talk about it. And, to be fair to JPP, that was kind of the same knock on John Abraham when he was with the Jets. And maybe it's a product of the New York media or something like that. And we all saw, with John Abraham, he basically said, Herm Edwards never really liked him and sort of slandered him to the media. And, he wasn't tough and he wouldn't play hurt and anything like that. And then he comes to Atlanta, he has that injury season that in 06. But then after that, he's John Abraham. He's the Predator. We all love him. To this day, we still love him. So, JPP could easily be that type of signing. What was that?
I feel like he tore a groin muscle in 06. So you were like,
yeah, it was like the first game against Carolina. I remember that because.
And then after that, he missed 2 games.
Yeah. So, JPP could easily be that type of signing for somebody. So, and it's one of those things, even when you question his motivation, he's so good that even an unmotivated JPP could still get like 30 pressures in his sleep. He might only get 1 or 2 sacks, but he's just too talented to suck, basically. He may not, be this 10 or 15 sack guy, and you can question whether he's been that guy the last couple of years, but he's still, at least worst case scenario, one of the top 15 or 20 pass rushers in the NFL. And it's just a matter of how much are you willing to pay for that.
I agree. And the thing is, outside of 2014, he hadn't really had a great year since 2011. He had a 6.5 sack year. He had a 2 sack year. He was fighting injuries this past year. He was dealing with issues and injuries, and that's probably another reason why the New York media is saying, hey, this guy sucks. This is what's going to be. He had 6 pass deflections, though, from the line. That's a high number for a defensive lineman to have.
Yeah.
He was out there. He plays the run really well. Really well. Even with that messed up hand, he was playing the run well. Because he understands how to anchor. And honestly, missing 1 finger and part of his thumb, yeah, it sucks. But I'd be shocked if that really affected him that much from that side. I think him only playing 8 games is really why he only had 1 sack. Not because his hand was messed up. He was still creating pressure. He was still hitting the quarterback.
Yeah.
So if you can get Jason Pierre-Paul at 27 years old, sign him to like a 1-year or a 2-year deal, let him prove it, then re-sign him to a longer-term deal, that's the ideal situation.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. All right. Speaking of that, our next question comes from Noah Williams. What do the Falcons do to fix the pass rush this offseason?
I think you have to cut Tyson Jackson and replace him with someone who can both stuff the run and rush the passer. Whether that's Jason Pierre-Paul, whether that's Mario Williams, whether it's Cameron Wake, at some sort of prove-it deal, you got to get someone in that spot. Whether you draft Kevin Dodd in the 3rd or 4th round, just because I don't think Kevin Dodd's really worth a higher pick than that. But you got to get someone who can play that strong side defensive end role. Even if it's on the right side and Vic's on the left side, it's still, in my head, the strong side defensive end role. Because Cliff Averill plays left defensive end. But he still plays a Leo. The guy who's playing that strong side defensive end is playing on the right side in Michael Bennett. So it doesn't really matter who it is, as long as you've got that guy that can play that same kind of Michael Bennett-ish role, where he's playing in a 6 or 7 technique in base, and then he can slide inside. Or you've got someone who can rotate inside, like a Grady Jarrett, a Jonathan Babineau, with that Rashid Hageman, Paul Soliak combination on the inside on 1st and 2nd down. So I mean, just looking at the names out there, if you can get Muhammad Wilkerson, you get Muhammad Wilkerson. But that guy ain't going nowhere. Olivier Vernon's a guy that you might be able to get. Just going down here, Jared Crick. I know he's not the best pass rusher of all of them, but he's a huge upgrade over Tyson Jackson.
Jared Crick's pretty terrible. I'm sorry.
I mean, I think he's a better player than Tyson Jackson. But then you got guys like Malik Jackson, who might be the odd man out in Denver. They paid Derek Wolfe. They got Von Miller. They got Danny Trevathan. You can't keep all of them. So Malik Jackson may be the one guy that's out there since they chose to pay Derek Wolfe. And he was a big reason why Von Miller was getting after Tom Brady the way he was. He was eating those double teams, and he pretty much plays the same exact role that I'm saying he should play in Atlanta. He lines up in the 6 technique, and Wade Phillips is 1 gap 3-4, and just eats a guy on that side, eats a gap, forces a double team, normally takes on a running back and a tackle, and does a great job at taking the double teams. And I think he'd be great for the Falcons. Of course, JPP we all talked about. I still can't see the Falcons taking a chance on Greg Hardy. I just can't see it happening. He's too volatile in a locker room, and he just wouldn't be worth it.
Yeah,
what?
Blank would never let that happen.
No, Blank would never let that happen. After him, there's a whole lot of nothing. I mean, even if you do go out and sign a guy like Robert Ayers, he's only a stopgap. Darryl Tapp, only a stopgap. Like, I wouldn't touch Red Bryant because I don't think you're really going anywhere different than what you already have in Tyson Jackson. And I think Tyson Jackson may actually be a better football player at this point in his career. The only other name that really stands out looking at this free agent list is Justin Tuck. And again, stopgap, 1 year type deal. But if you draft a guy and he's just not really ready, say you get a guy like Carl Nassib in the draft, I think Justin Tuck would be a good fit there. As like, hey, this is how you do this role. And you basically rotate him and Nassib out at that strong side defensive end role. Then you also have to make sure you get pass rush from your strong side linebacker spot, which I think Brooks Reed will provide a little bit of this year. I don't really think the Falcons go out and get Bruce Irvin. I know that everybody wants Bruce Irvin. I'm with Aaron in thinking that it doesn't really happen. But a guy that could be the one that stands out is Nick Perry of Green Bay. Great athlete. Hasn't really lived up to his expectations. But I think if you put him in more of a role where he can, on 3rd down, just put his hand in the dirt and get after the quarterback, he'd be a much better football player. But he is a good run defender. I wouldn't even mind Nick Perry in that strong side defensive end role. I think he could be that surprise player, that 25-year-old guy that you go out there and sign, and he surprises everybody by being maybe not the next Michael Bennett, but the poor man's Michael Bennett. And another name that stands out to me is Courtney Upshaw. Played at Alabama. He's going to be a full free agent. And we all know what Baltimore does with their free agents. They don't re-sign them. It's just what they do. But he could be a fun fit for that outside, that Leo role as well. And I think defensive tackle is fine. Let Grady Jarrett and Rashid Hageman continue to develop. Let Babineau and Soliai each play their 40% of the snaps that they need to play, and just keep going that way.
Yeah. I think what probably the Falcons will try to do is try to get a defensive line a rotation similar to what the Seahawks had in 2014. I think, as Scott was saying, you already have Vic Beasley in that Cliff Averill role where he's not playing a ton in the base package. His primary role is to play as that left side defensive end in the sub package, but he'll get mixed in there as a Leo in the base every now and then. But you're not going to see him playing 400 run snaps or whatever the case may be. And basically with that, the Seahawks often employed, like, Bennett and Averill were out there almost every time they rushed the quarterback. They used a lot of Jordan Hill on the inside. I think basically all Jordan Hill did that year was play sub as an interior rusher. I think that's perfect role for Grady Jarrett. They're very similar players, I think. And then basically the fourth guy was a combination of Bruce Irvin and O'Brien Schofield, usually playing on the right defensive end spot. And so I think with the Falcons, you probably imagine them basically having some combination of a guy. And whether it's Bierman, whether it's Schofield, whether it's Reed, or whether it's somebody else that's not on the roster yet, I think that's something they look for. I honestly think they'll probably use Claiborne. They're probably going to re-sign Claiborne and use him in the Bennett role, which was in the base package. A lot of times Bennett would play outside, and in the sub package he would usually kick inside. And I think with Claiborne, they'll kind of have him play inside and outside. They probably will have him play a lot more outside than inside, largely because of Jarrett and Babineau's presence. So I do feel like the Falcons will probably look for an edge rusher, someone potentially that can play Leo in the base package and also get reps in that sub package on the right side opposite Beasley. A couple of guys that I think would be interesting if they get them that immediately jump to mind. Mario Williams would be interesting. I don't know if the Falcons are going to fork up the cash to get Mario Williams, but I think he could play that Leo. I think he's a perfect fit at that Leo spot. Chris Long, if he gets cut, I think would be an interesting pickup at that spot. He'd probably have to sign a prove-it deal just because of the injuries he's had the last couple of years. Wake would be interesting if he can come back from his Achilles injury. He'd be perfect in that role. Just a couple of guys that I think, you could potentially have. Scott named a couple of them. I'm trying to think of some other different guys, but I can't think of anybody right now. Probably should have looked this up earlier. But I do feel like –
and the Rams could save $12 million by cutting Chris Long.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting with Long because I think I read something last week that he basically said he's willing to take a pay cut, but, the Rams might decide it's not worth it. So we'll see how that goes. But I do feel like the Falcons, you're going to see, unlike what the Seahawks have basically morphed into since Quentin's left, I think you're going to still see a sort of a strict difference between the base and the nickel. Just because I think a lot of the guys that the Falcons want to use in their nickel sub package, their best pass rushers, aren't really ideally base guys right now. Like Beasley and Jarrett and Babineau's at a point in his career where you just kind of want to limit his run snaps as much as possible. And Claiborne's never been a great run defender, so he's not exactly a great base guy either. So you'll probably, I think you will see the Falcons maybe add a couple of guys in their base package this offseason. And I know Falcon fans will probably be flipping out like, this guy is not a great pass rusher. Why are we signing all these run defenders? And it's like, because you just want to have good run defense. It's not all about getting sacks. As long as you're like, the point I would make to people is that 2013 Seahawks defense had a very distinctive base and nickel packages. 4 different guys basically came on the field, and the Seahawks, no one was complaining about the Seahawks pass rush or anything like that, because on those critical third downs, that nickel group was in and they were making plays. And at the end of the day, whether or not you have a bunch of base guys that can get after the quarterback or not, on 3rd and 7, when you throw in your 4 nickel sub-package guys in, if they can get pressure on the quarterback, then whether or not Tyson Jackson or Paul Solai or Rashid Hageman or whoever else is out there on 1st and 10 can get pressure, it doesn't really matter. On the critical money downs, it's about, can you get after the quarterback on 3rd down? Right now, the Falcons don't have that, but if they can build towards that, then they'll be fine. So, having only 4 guys that can play every down isn't as big a deal as people like to make it out to be.
Well, and that's another thing that I was going to make a point about. Between Hageman and Solai, I think you've got 2 guys who can rush the passer on the inside on the rundowns. And I think Jarrett and Babineau coming in as basically pass rushing guys helps out. But Tyson Jackson can't rush the passer. Croy Bierman can't rush the passer in base defense. So the real issue is that you don't have 2 guys in base defense that can both stuff the run and rush the passer. And this offseason, out of all of them, gives you a chance to get those guys, whether it's the draft, whether it's free agency. If you do go out there and you take Kevin Dodd, even if you take him in the 2nd round, he can rush the passer and he can stuff the run. If you get Carl Nassib in the 2nd round, he can do that in that role. It all just depends on who you're looking at and which round you're looking at. You may not have a 10-sack guy in that spot, but if you have a guy who can get 3-4 sacks and then, stuffs the run well, and then Vic Beasley takes that next step, and Hageman takes that next step, and Jarrett takes that next step, that might be enough to get you from that 18-sack spot to that 30-sack spot. It's about improvement. You don't have to get 60 sacks a year to have the best defense in the league. You get 30, 35 sacks, but you get great run defense, and you're holding teams to under 3.8 yards a carry, and you're holding teams to under 6.8 yards per passing attempt. That's going to give you more than enough defense.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's about taking strides forward as opposed to solving all the problems immediately. If you can get upgrades over Bierman and Jackson at those in spots in the base that, may not get a bunch of sacks, but if they can get, 15, 20 pressures each, that's an upgrade. And you've improved. And, again, at the end of the day, it's not going to be whether or not Croy Bierman or Tyson Jackson or Paul Solai has a bunch of sacks. It's going to be whether or not Vic Beasley and Babineau and Jarrett and Claiborne and whoever else is in those nickel sub-packages can get pressure. When we play the Seahawks or when we play the Panthers, those are the guys that are going to be paid money to get sacks, and those are the guys where the pressure is going to be on, not necessarily our base package.
Although to be fair about sorry, what was I going to say? I totally had a brain fart.
Okay. Can I move on to the next question?
Oh, yeah. No, I was going to say, to be fair about Paul Solai, I think this scheme helps him out in creating pressure. Because I feel like when he was out there pass rushing in the base set, he can create pressure when they were getting double teams on the outside.
Yeah, no, I think they're I think their jobs are primarily to stop the run, and I think they do a decent job getting pressure. I'm not going to have – I don't personally see Solai, how many pressures did he have last year? 10?
Yeah, but it was like 10 on 100 attempts.
Yeah, but like I don't think if you double that you're going to see 20 or anything like that. I think he probably maxes out at about 10 or 15.
Yeah, but that's where he needs to be. Like that's what I'm saying. You don't give him 300 attempts, but you have a guy who on 10 attempts can create 10 pressure, or on 100 attempts can create 10 pressures, and can eat doubles on the other 90 of them.
Yeah, yeah, that's what that. Yeah, you're right. We're
That's what I'm saying. He's a valuable person.
yes. Okay. Next question sort of deal with some of the things that Scott and I just talked about, but Nick Pasqualoni asked, can Tyson move back to defensive tackle in the scheme if the Falcons got a base defensive end to replace him?
No, I don't think Tyson Jackson should be on the roster next year, period, because I don't think Tyson Jackson provides anything but a big fat body to stuff the run. And I hate to say it this way, he's getting paid way too much money to just be a fat ass on the end.
Fair enough. Yeah, I think Nick. We've seen Tyson Jackson play D tackle, and we saw that in 2014. He wasn't very good at it. So no, not really. I think if Tyson Jackson is not going to be the base defensive end, then he's not going to be on team. And that leads into the next question, which is from the Colorado Falcon. Tyson Jackson versus Paul Solai. Who do you cut if you had to pick one, and what would that mean for the cap? Scott basically, I'll let him look up the cap implications, but he gave his answer. Yeah, I think Tyson Jackson is the obvious choice. I don't think Tyson Jackson is as waste of a space as Scott thinks he is, but he does have his limitations, and Scott is right. He gets paid way too much considering his limitations. I think he's a very good run defender, but you can probably get 80% the run defender for 30% the price. So I think that's a worthwhile investment for you. I think there's a decent chance that Solia is not back next year. I think his cap hit is almost like $7 million. But I feel like you can probably get a cheaper player. Like I think with a guy like Brandon Mebane out there, I think you can probably get Mebane in for like $3 million as opposed to like $11 that Solia is making, and get just as good, if not better, production from Mebane. But yeah, if I had to cut one, I would choose Jackson. And Scott, do you have the cap stuff?
Yeah, I've got it pulled up. You would save $2.5 million next year, whether you cut either Soliai or Jackson. It's the year after that you're looking at bigger hits. And I think you wait till the year after that to cut Paul Soliai. But even then, Soliai is a leader. Soliai is a defensive captain. And I could see the Falcons just restructuring him next year, or even restructuring him this year so that his cap hits are less. Soliai is worth keeping because he gives you that big body in the middle that Grady Jarrett was. Or not Grady Jarrett, Grady Jackson was. So I just don't think that Tyson Jackson is worth the money. And I think you could easily cut him, save that $2.3 or $2.55 million, and spend it on someone else who can give you more. Take that $2.5 million and combine it with the money that you would be spending on, I don't know, Croy Bierman. That 2.5 you'd spend on Croy Bierman, you got $5 million right there that you can put towards a prove-it deal for JPP.
There you go. Yeah, I would guess probably, if I was putting like probabilities on it or something, I would probably say there's like a 90% chance that Tyson Jackson gets cut and maybe like a 55% chance that Soliai gets cut. Maybe 49, somewhere. It's probably close to a 50-50. I think it could go either way. But, I don't feel like he has to get cut or anything. I just feel like maybe the Falcons are like, especially with Quinn, is like, I know Brandon Mebane. I coached him for 6 years, I think, in Seattle or something ridiculous like that. He's my guy. Solely, I was really more of a Nolan guy than anything. So maybe they move on there, but we'll see. All right.
I think that they really like Soliai in the locker room. Tyson Jackson, not as much, but I do think that Soliai is like the guy in the locker room that's leading that defensive line.
Okay.
It's him and Babineau. So I think those two guys are going to play out this year, and be good to go.
Okay. I can see it happening. All right. Our next question comes from the Atlanta Homer. He says, trade down and free agent wide receiver targets such as Travis Benjamin, Alshon Jeffrey, Marvin Jones, and the likelihood of getting one of them.
All right. Let's look and see who's out there and available at wide receiver. Going by age. You said Alshon Jeffrey, very unlikely. He's probably going to be franchise tagged. I'm with Aaron on that. I hope he's not, but I don't think it's likely Atlanta would bring him in even if he wasn't.
It's a lot of money. You have basically two $70 million wide receivers on a team that wants to run the ball.
Yeah, it just doesn't make sense. Marvin Jones for like $3 million, maybe. Like $3 million a year, 3-year deal, something like that, maybe. Sanu, same kind of deal. Travis Benjamin, I'd give him probably $4 million, $5 million a year to be that ideal number 2. But honestly, I think Rashard Matthews is the guy. Give him 3 years, $6 million. He can run routes. He's effective. He's basically the poor man's Roddy White. He's basically like 2012 Roddy White at this point. He's not the fastest guy, but he can run routes. He can get open. He can create impact. And he may never be that 140-yard receiver he once was, but he'll put up 3 catches, 75 yards, 6 catches, 85 yards. He'll be open and forcing double teams on his side of the field while Julio Jones just goes off. And yeah, he might get 1 catch for 16 yards, but Julio Jones will have just gone off for 200 friggin' yards and you'll have no idea what happened.
Okay. Let me see. I'm just trying to look up something real quick. I think there's a 0% chance that Alshon Jeffrey is a Falcon next year, as I've explained before. I'm trying to figure out Marvin Jones' situation. I think it's a low probability that he's a Falcon. I like Marvin Jones. I think he's a good player. I think he's always been underrated. He's had some injury issues in Cincinnati, but I feel like he'll be a higher priority for other teams. He could go to Washington if they wind up cutting any of their starters and play for Jay Gruden again. He could follow Hugh Jackson to Cleveland. I think Cincinnati really likes him, and so they'll make a play at keeping him. So I would probably imagine some other team is going to be willing to pay him more money than the Falcons would. So I would say maybe the chance he winds up in Atlanta, it's like 15%. I think the odds are much higher with Travis Benjamin just because we have his former position coach and Mike McDaniels here in Atlanta. We have his former offensive coordinator and Kyle Shanahan here in Atlanta. He's got speed. He can stretch the field vertically. I guess I like Travis Benjamin a lot. I think he brings a dynamic nature to the offense that Roddy White doesn't bring. I guess my only concern with Travis Benjamin is based off of this past season he had. I think he had like 75 catches or something like that. I don't feel like I think he's going to, not to say he's a one-year wonder, but I don't feel like he's going to put up that sort of production consistently and probably not in this offense. Julio Jones is basically a black hole. It's going to suck up most of the targets, and a guy like Benjamin's probably only going to catch 50 or 60 passes. It's really about whether or not, he's turning that into a yards per catch average of like 14 or 15 by getting those vertical plays. So I don't feel like a team should go out and pay him like $30 million or something like that, because I don't think he's going to live up to that contract. He's more of a great number 3, good number 2 than a great number 2 like Roddy White was in the past couple of years. But I do think the odds are pretty good. So I would say like 70% that Benjamin winds up in Atlanta. As for the first part of your question, trading down, I think there's a good probability that the Falcons trade down at some point in the draft. I don't know if it's going to be in the first round. I don't know if it's going to be the second round. I don't know if it's going to be a third round, but I feel like the Falcons almost have to trade down at some point in the first 2 days of the draft to get extra picks in those middle rounds, because they just have too many holes. I think they'll be active in free agency, but I don't think they're going to plug every spot that they need to plug in free agency. And a lot of it is going to be they want to get younger at a lot of spots, as opposed to just sort of throwing stopgap backups there in free agency. So I think a trade down is a pretty good possibility. I think picking 17 in the draft is a good spot for a trade down, because there always seems to be some team at the end of round 1 trying to trade up into the middle of the first round. So you can probably drop back 5 or 10 spots and still get a good player in the late first round. So I think there's a decent chance that you see that happen. Okay, our next question comes from Andrew Schauweiler. He asked, do you think the Falcons look at signing Alfred Morris this offseason? Aaron mentioned Lynch.
I think someone like Marshawn Lynch or Alfred Morris would be a waste of money for what you'd spend on them. I don't think Lynch gives you anything that you don't already have in the offense, especially since this is Lynch after all the miles have been put on the tires. Lynch right now is like a set of tires with 65,000 miles on them. You better replace them, because you're about to get to the wiring that holds the tire together, that holds all the rubber together. Alfred Morris, he's just been very injured lately. Unless he takes a cheap deal and he's cool with being the number 2 running back, because I wouldn't mind Alfred Morris surpassing Tevin Coleman for that role. But unless he's going to take that kind of money, it's not really worth it. I don't think you should sign a running back really at all, pretty much ever, because I don't think you've outside of Michael Turner and Warwick Dunn, how many running backs go out there and get decent sized contracts and really live up to them? How many teams let these good running backs go? It just doesn't happen. So honestly, I think the best bet is just to take a running back late. If you take one with the 4th round pick, and you take a 4th round running back pretty much every year, I don't really think you're going to do any harm to the team by doing that. I'm just trying to think of who I've got. There's a couple guys I was looking at this past week on film, and the names are escaping me. So, they were from real small schools. Tyler Irvin from San Jose State could be a good fit. Atlanta should probably get someone with a little bit of power. So CJ Procise, if he's there in the 4th round, wouldn't be a bad fit. For all but 2 teams, the countdown to the NFL. That's me looking at a list, because I don't have all my names off the top of my head. But yeah, CJ Procise in the mid rounds, Calvin Taylor out of Florida in the mid rounds. He's got some power. If you go towards the late rounds, there was what's his name from Richmond? Jacoby Green out of Richmond. He's basically another Devontae Freeman, but like a poor man's version. And then another name was Fresno State, I want to say. Martez Walker out of Fresno State. But again, you're not looking at like ridiculous names. You're looking at late round picks who just have some power and can beat out Teron Ward for the spot.
Okay. I guess this is my chance to explain that whole Marshawn Lynch nonsense.
We're trolling everybody, right?
No, look, I know there's no chance that the Falcons are going to sign him. I was just basically saying I think Lynch has one more good year left in him. I think the problem with this past season, I think if you look at his numbers, you'll be like, oh, he's done. I think a lot of that had to do with playing behind a really terrible Seahawks offensive line and obviously the injury sort of he had to deal with. But I think when you actually go and you look at him playing in Seattle, I thought he still looked like Marshawn Lynch. Maybe not the guy he was 2-3 years ago, but still looked like one of the best running backs in the NFL. I think he's got one more year left. I don't think he's going to be a Falcon. I think you can make a very compelling case that he wouldn't be a great mesh in the locker room. That's all fine. That's all true. I understand that. I think Lynch does bring some things to the table that the Falcons currently don't have. I think he's a much better pass protector than anybody on the Falcons roster. I think he obviously is, everybody knows how physical a runner he is. I don't think there's a single player on this roster that's even in his zip code, in his area code, as far as that goes. So I do feel like I think, I know this is not going to sound popular, but I think he'd be the starting running back in Atlanta if he was on the team. I think he's a better player than Devontae Freeman is.
I think you're advocating for 2012 Michael Turner for us to go out and sign 2012 Michael Turner.
I think Lynch is more like 2010 Michael Turner. Not the guy he was in his prime, but still very, very good. I think, to me, my concern with the running back position, I do feel like the Falcons need depth there. I don't know if the Falcons will go and get depth, but here's my fear at the running back position. Devontae had, something like 340 touches this year. He toted the rock quite a bit. And, it's approaching that number where you start to get a little nervous about how much of his workload is. And so I do wonder, he's not necessarily built to be this sort of guy year in and year out. And I guess the Falcons are sort of hoping, Coleman makes a big jump. I think Coleman is certainly capable of making that big jump. I've been an advocate of his for the last couple of months that he could make that big jump. But there was a decent chance he doesn't make that big jump. And he's basically the same player that he was last year, which was hit and miss, was okay, but certainly not the guy this offense needs to be functioning if Devontae Freeman misses time. And we know Teron Ward is just a guy, really. So my worry about the running back position is if Devontae Freeman gets hurt, and knock on wood, that doesn't happen, but I feel like there's a level of complacency at that position that a smart team, if they can get a good player at that spot, and even if it's just a backup, it would be a very smart, savvy move for the Falcons. It's just a matter of who. My personal opinion, I think ideal situation, it would be Lynch. He would sign a one-year deal, a real cheap deal. Chances of any of those things happening is probably 0.001%. I understand that. It's just me being completely hypothetical in that situation. As for Alfred Morris specifically, I think the Falcons will look at him. I think bringing him in, again, it's going to depend on price tag. He'll probably, I think he's still relatively young, like 26, 27. So I feel like he probably thinks he can get at least a decent deal out there, probably more than the Falcons are willing to pay. I haven't really paid that much attention to the running back prospects in this draft just because it's not a huge pressing need for the Falcons. And it's one of those spots that they'd have to trade back to get extra picks so that they could have the luxury of taking a third string running back. I have seen CJ Prosise. I do like him a lot. I think you can make an argument he's a better player than Tevin Coleman was, at least in terms of his potential in the passing game. And he's got a little bit more oomph to his running than Coleman did coming out of Indiana. So he would certainly be a guy I would look at if he's available as just a upside pick. But yeah, that I think the running back position isn't as secure as probably people think it is. But again, that's just maybe me being more doom and gloom. And Devontae Freeman may wind up having 200 and some odd carries, or Tevin Coleman makes that big jump, and it's not going to be an issue. But I feel like there's the potential that 6 months from now or 9 months from now,
the next Maurice Jones-Drew, and he has 250 carries and 60, 70 catches a year and looks really good for the next 6 years.
Yeah, I mean, all these things, again, I don't know what the future is going to hold. I'm just saying I think there's a decent chance that 9 months from now we're complaining about the running back position, and we go into 2017 offseason talking about we need to get another backup running back. So that's all I'm saying. And if the Falcons can head off that concern and get an insurance policy, then do it. If they stand pat at the position, it's a roll of the dice. Not a huge roll of the dice, but it is something that could be problematic down the road. We'll see.
I mean, honestly, just looking at who's available, I'd rather see them go out and get Travaris Cadet or bring back Jacquizz Rodgers. Just because those guys, they can pass protect. And if you get a guy like Cadet, you've got someone who's got some power behind him.
I wouldn't mind seeing either Quiz or Anton Smith back in Atlanta as third string running backs.
I honestly would love to see Quiz come back as a third string running back, because I feel like in the zone scheme he'd actually be effective as a runner. Maybe not like a 10-year, not like the kind of carry guy, not the kind of running back that Freeman is, but I think he'd at least be like a 4-yard per carry guy once the Falcons fix the interior. Like, I think Freeman, once the Falcons fix the interior, is way closer to a 4.3, 4.4 yard per carry kind of guy.
Yeah, Quiz is a great fit in his own blocking team. That's what he played at Oregon State. That's what he should have played in Atlanta, but the Falcons weren't really looking at him as anything more than a third down back, so they didn't really care about his potential as a running back.
You sign all these zone backs, and then you never run the zone scheme. It makes no sense to me.
Yep. Yeah, great scouting there by the Falcons. Next question is again from Andrew Shawwaller. He says, I read an article that said Seattle had their offensive line coach and offensive coordinator work together to make up the scheme for the game they were about to play and help out during the games as far as play calling, and it seemed to work for Wilson in Seattle. Do you see Quinn and the Falcons doing the same thing by bringing in someone to help Shanahan and Ryan with the offense, maybe a new quarterback coach?
I honestly think that's what Raheem Morris's job is going to be this year. It may not be to be the wide receiver coach 100%. It may be, hey, these are coverages I'm seeing the defenses run right now. We should probably attack here and here, and let's call a play to attack here and here that Shanahan may not be able to see on his end because he's been so offensively focused. So maybe you see a small change in play calling, like, hey, these guys are creeping up. These guys are creeping up. We need to take a shot deep. So Shanahan calls a max protect, and Atlanta takes a shot deep to Julio. Or maybe, hey, these guys, they're only putting 6 in the box. It's a goal line situation. Let's give Ryan an option to check the box and see what they've got. So that third down play, like what happened in San Francisco right at the end of the game, when there were 5 guys in the box, Ryan could look at the box, just look to his right, and tell Freeman, hey, this is what the play is, and it'd be good to go. Or everybody in the offense would know, hey, if there's 5 guys in the box, this is the play. If there's 6 guys in the box, this is the play. You would just have everybody get on the same page. So I think that's going to help out a lot. And I think that's really what Raheem Morris's job is to see those little things that maybe Shanahan hasn't been seeing. Like, hey, the gap run game is running a little better than the zone scheme, so let's call a couple more gap plays.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I could see that happening. During the season, I speculated that the Falcons might bring in somebody to basically be sort of a consultant, somebody where, maybe sort of alleviate some of Shanahan's grip on the offense. And I think you can make a very good case that maybe that's Raheem Morris, a guy that Dan Quinn has known for almost 20 years. Dan Quinn basically said in his press conference the other day that he doesn't foresee any other moves at the coaching staff. So I don't think they'll bring in a new quarterbacks coach or anything like that. But I think everything that Scott said is certainly plausible, if not likely. All right, now we get into some draft questions. First one comes from Evan Birchfield. He says, who are some players you'll be looking at in the Senior Bowl game?
All of them.
Good one, Scott. Yeah, I got to look these guys up. Let's see.
Now, if you really had to ask and really wanted a good guide for what the Falcons should be looking for, or really who the Falcons should be looking for, at safety-ish, Jalen Mills wouldn't be a bad name to look at. For a potential replacement for Devin Hester, a guy like Cyrus Jones in the mid rounds to play that fifth corner, basically Allen Rossum role on the team while he develops into a nickel wouldn't hurt. Watch out for Noah Spence, Sean Oakman, Sheldon Rankins. All 3 of those guys are very good football players. Rankins is going to have a great week this week. Just keep going down. Antonio Morrison's a solid inside linebacker. Deion Jones is fast and really good inside linebacker, but I think he's a little bit overrated at the same time. Ragland, Jordan Jenkins, I don't think either of those guys are really worth the Falcons' time right now, just because I think they don't have either the athletic fit or the scheme fit for what Atlanta needs. I think they're both SLBs in the scheme. And then Eric Stryker is a name to watch out for. If Atlanta was serious about getting speed on defense, he'd be the guy to put him at weak side linebacker, and just be happy about it. Graham Glasgow, center from Michigan, very smart guy. He will have trouble with spin moves inside, but when you look at the NFL, you're not really getting a lot of defensive tackles that have a great spin move inside. And then Cody Whitehair, Connor McGovern, both those guys are really good. This is just going down the South roster. Quarterback, Jake Coker could be a name that the Falcons draft late. He's got a really good arm, and he's got a lot of potential as a backup quarterback. And then some power guys at running back. Jonathan Williams from Arkansas. He's not the fastest guy, but Arkansas does run a bit of a zone-style scheme, and he would be worth looking at. At safety, Jeremy Cash is very fun to watch, and he'd be a great fit where William Moore's at right now. Little Gronk from Kansas State wouldn't be a bad fit for the Falcons either. Let's see, Paul McRoberts. I kind of like Paul McRoberts actually. He's a 6'3", receiver, runs good routes. Not the fastest guy, but you need the number 2 to Julio. And if you want a guy who kind of reminds me of Kevin Walter back in Houston, I think that would be Paul McRoberts. And then Sharon Peake out of Clemson isn't a bad football player either. And if the Falcons wanted to get fancy with this scheme, they could always get Sterling Shepard out of Oklahoma. On the other side of the ball, or on the other roster, Carl Nassib, he's a name I've been throwing out a little bit tonight. I really like his fit in the scheme. I think he's a good right side defensive end. Matt Ioannidis out of Temple. He can play that 3-tech, 5-tech role, give some pass rush. He's basically Tyson Jackson if Tyson Jackson could get after the quarterback. At least competently for 6 or 7 sacks a year. Sheldon Day out of Notre Dame. He's going to remind a lot of people of John Babineau. He just busts through the backfield all the time. Adolphus Washington's a name that's going to be – he's probably going to be a faller, but a lot of people like him. Tyler Matakevich out of Temple. He reminds me a lot of Paul Warlow, but I think he's a better athlete. So he might actually be a good fit for Atlanta. He's a smart guy. Austin Blythe out of Iowa, good center, but I don't know if he's really worth that high of a pick. Nick Martin out of Notre Dame, Zach Martin's little brother. Again, if he can look good at guard this week, it'll help him out a lot. And I could see Atlanta really considering him in the 3rd or 4th round. There's not really a lot of speed at linebacker on the North team. I mean, and Atlanta, that's what Atlanta really needs. Quarterback, Carson Wentz is going to be a top 5 pick. I think he's the guy this year that just springboards his way up. I don't really like Kevin Hogan. And Jeff Driscoll has no business being at this game. He's the Shane Carden of this year's draft. He's awful. Tyler Irvin out of San Jose State, he's fun to watch. Again, there's just really not a lot of great talent. I do like Tyvis Powell out of Ohio State. I think he's a good fit as a strong safety in the scheme. He's a bigger guy, but he's also intelligent in his coverage. And then Darian Thompson can play either free or strong safety in the scheme. I know Aaron likes him better as a free. I personally like him better as a strong. But either way, I think if Atlanta took him in the first 2 rounds, it wouldn't hurt. And then at tight end, the only real name that stands out outside of Little Gronk, because it is a Gronk name, is Nick Vannett out of Ohio State. And that's about it. Oh, yeah, Braxton Miller. If Atlanta can get Braxton Miller, they should go get him.
Okay. The positions I'm really going to be paying a lot of attention to is offensive line and safety. I think there are a couple of safeties in this game that I really like that I think could potentially be 2nd-round picks for the Falcons. Potentially, if we see sort of what we saw a couple of years ago, where there was like 5 safeties taken in the 1st round. I think it was like 2014 with a Buchanan and Ward. If the Falcons do trade back in the 1st round and nab one of these safeties, if there's a little bit of a run, I think some of these guys are good enough to sneak into the 1st round. Thompson's one of them. I like Jalen Mills. He's probably more of a slot corner in Quinn's scheme than a true free safety. Jeremy Cash is another player I like. He reminds me a lot of Willie Moe. I think the one knock on him, similar to Willie Moe, is going to be how good is he in man coverage. But again, our scheme doesn't really ask him to do that a ton, so it's not as big a deal. Kevin Byard from Middle Tennessee, I think he could be, if we don't get our strong safety in the early rounds, or maybe we sign a free agent strong safety and you draft a guy like Byard in the 4th, or if we trade back and get a 5th-round pick, I think he's a good developmental prospect. Or you can make an argument that he's better than Kamal Ishmael. Offensive line, I'm really looking a lot at some of these undersized tackles because Scott and I have talked about this. A lot of, the sort of guards in the NFL tend to be good guards in the NFL tend to fall in one or two categories. They tend to be those Chance Warmack, Larry Warford type of big-bodied, power-blocking guys that were all-American guards in college, or they were really good offensive tackles, but were either too short or too light or not athletic enough to stick at tackle in the NFL, didn't have enough length or whatnot. And so they stick them in the guard and they become really good there. Great examples of that, particularly for the zone blocking scheme. Josh Sitton in Green Bay is a good example of that.
Evan Mathis.
Zach Martin is another good example of that. So, it's one of those things with the guard position. I think a couple of these guys, I don't see any guys that I would say, oh, he'll come, other than maybe Cody Whitehair, he'll come in day one and start. I think a lot of these guys are more developmental guys that you sort of hope that you can stash them on the roster for a year, and then in 2017 maybe they can compete, push a Levitri, push a Chester, push a whoever for a starting spot. At guard, a couple of guys, a guy like Joe Dahl from Washington State is a guy I'm curious about. I've seen a little bit of him. I like some of his game. Joe Haig, the left tackle from North Dakota State. He measured in a little bit bigger than I expected him. I thought he was going to be another one. He was like 6'6", so he might be able to stick at tackle. Connor McGovern, Christian Westerman. There's some of these centers I'd like to get a longer look at. Nick Martin, Jack Allen, Austin Blythe, I think is a really good fit in the zone blocking scheme and could be a solid 4th, 5th round sort of developmental sort of center for the future. Outside of those two positions, there's obviously, linebackers, some of these linebackers. Ragland, obviously, you want to see what he does sort of as a coverage guy because he didn't, Alabama's scheme wasn't really asking him to play in space a ton. It was mostly just go downhill and destroy people, which he does very well. But I'm a big fan of Leonte Carew. I know he's got some off-field issues. Braxton Miller is a guy, if you've seen any Ohio State game over the last 4 years, how can you not be a fan of Braxton Miller? I'm also curious. I haven't really done a lot of homework on some of these interior pass rushers, like a Sheldon Rankins and whatnot. So I'm curious to see what those guys can do in the future as well. And there's a lot of big corners. That's been a hallmark of the Senior Bowl the last couple of years. And so I think there's probably a good chance that maybe the Falcons get a 4th corner in the late rounds, maybe one of these guys is playing in the game. So I'll keep my eyes open for one of those guys. KJ Dillon would be an interesting pickup. He's a guy that I think could definitely be that. All right. Okay, lost my place. All right, Space Hopper 11 asks, do you think the Falcons should double dip on the defensive line as there's so much talented depth this year?
It'd be great if the Falcons had multiple picks to do that. Or if they just said, you know what, we're going to try to get everything but defensive line and free agency. And then once we get to the draft, we're going to try and get Shaq Lawson and Carl Nassib. That'd be great. I would love to see that happen. But that would be basically – that'd be the only way I think they should double dip. Or if they cut Soliai and Jackson, then you do need that interior defensive lineman. Getting Sheldon Rankins probably isn't a bad idea.
Yeah, I think you got it. You really want to come out of this draft drafting a good edge guy somewhere in the first 3 or 4 rounds. I think that's sort of ideal for the Falcons, whether that's 1st round, 4th round, or somewhere in between. You'll have to play it by ear. But you do want to get another developmental pass rusher on the edge so that long term you can say it's going to be Beasley and this guy that are going to be bringing the heat on the outside in, come 2018, 2019, and whenever. Double dipping, I think it makes sense. It's really about, whether or not I would be surprised if the Falcons, I wouldn't say the Falcons should do that in the first 2 rounds. But if you get into a situation like we saw last year where guys like Grady Jarrett, guys like Michael Bennett slipped into day 3 of the draft, and you see a really good interior pass rusher that you might have had a second or third round grade on still there in round 4 or whatnot, then why wouldn't you pull the trigger? I mean, the odds are, chances are your other alternative is drafting a 4th round guy. If you can get a guy that you think is a top 75 talent at pick, 122 or something like that, then why wouldn't you pull the trigger on that? So double dipping, I think it makes sense. Is it something that's a high priority right now? No, but I do think you got to get at least one edge guy, and if you can get a good D tackle, because that's really where the strength of this class is, more so than the edge guys, then you pull the trigger. It's a pretty deep group, and I think you can still get good players in the rounds 3 through 5 or 6 or whatnot. All right. Andrew Shawwaller asks, if the Falcons chose one of the 2 to draft, who would you rather have, Kevin Dodd or Shaq Lawson?
Shaq Lawson, it's not even close. I mean, Lawson is just a monster. Lawson is, at best, he's exactly what you have in Michael Bennett.
Okay. Yeah. I haven't done a ton of Dodd homework. I saw the national championship game. I've watched like one other game of his. I like him. I don't know if I love him, but the rumors right now is that he's going to get drafted ahead of Shaq Lawson. He might be a top 20 pick. I don't know if I like him that much. I think Lawson is better based off of what I've seen, but I'm sure I'll be certainly watching more Dodd tape if we get closer to the combine, and that's him being a top 20, top, whatever pick becomes a little bit more than just a rumor and sort of buzz. Because then, if you want to get Kevin Dodd, we might have to use our number 1 pick on him. So I'll do more work on him, and Andrew.
Blowing him out of proportion, aren't they?
What was that, Scott?
People are blowing his Alabama game out of proportion, aren't they?
Well, I think he's a good player. I think he's certainly, given there really isn't that many great edge rushers in this draft class. I think there's like Lawson, and even Lawson is good, but I don't necessarily look at him and say, oh yeah, he's going to be a 10 sack guy in the NFL. I see him more of like a 6-8 sack guy. But that's not a bad thing. Chris Long is like an 8 sack guy. Justin Smith was an 8 sack guy before he became a 3-4 DN. So being an 8 sack guy is not a diss. That's actually good. But after those guys, it's maybe like 3 or 4 guys that you really like. Oh, like I really like Noah Spence. So I think a lot of what was happening with Dodd is he's getting pushed up the board because there isn't that second or third tier edge rusher. And if you need pass rushers, and all teams do, might as well pull the trigger. All right. Noah Williams asks, are there any safeties worth taking at 17 this year, or would the Falcons need to trade back to avoid reaching?
I don't think you should take a safety in the first round. I don't think it's worth the pick. Unless you're getting the next Earl Thomas. It's not in this draft.
I disagree. I think I really like Carl Joseph. I don't think he's Earl Thomas, but I think he's a lot closer than probably right now he's getting credit for. I would take Carl Joseph. I don't think he's going to be taken that high. I think his injury issues are probably going to keep him certainly out of the top 20 picks. He might sneak into the first round if he comes back strong this offseason and shows he's healthy. I don't know the status of his health. I think he had a knee injury or whatever in October or something like that. So I don't know. But I really do like Carl Joseph. I think he has all the tools you're looking for. I think he can play center field. I think he will hit people. He's a thumper. Like, to me, he's like 75% of Earl Thomas, has great ball skills, has great range, has great instincts, but he hits harder than Earl Thomas. He just doesn't have, that elite range and that elite ball skills that Earl Thomas has. So I would take Joseph at 17, but I think probably ideally, because no one else is going to take him at 17, you could probably trade back, pick up a third or fourth round pick or whatnot, and take him in the late first or early second.
So last year there were no first round safeties. 14, Pryor, Clinton Dix. Let's see, Dan Buchanan, who really plays a linebacker. And let's see, Jimmy Ward were the first round safeties. And I'd say
Jimmy Ward's really a slot corner.
Yeah, Ward's really a slot corner. So really, you had one safety the last 2 years in the first round. Before that, Kenny Vaccaro, who's been a huge disappointment. Eric Reed. Matt Elam, who's been a disappointment. Like, outside of like Harrison Smith, who was drafted near the end of the first round, I'm not seeing any like, oh, this is a great, you have to get a safety at 17. Like, if Atlanta is going safety, they need to trade back to that 25 to 30 range. Because I don't think there's anybody at safety right now who's that much of a game changer. I think you can get someone as good at 47 as you can get at 17 in this draft at safety.
That's probably true.
So why waste the pick at 17 on a safety when you might have a linebacker fall that you like? You might have a pass rusher that you really like fall. You might have that Joey Bosa random fall that no one's expecting. And, oh, hey, look, he's right there for you to take, and you've got the next Patrick Kearney on the roster. So I don't think safeties are worth taking at 17. No.
Fair enough. I think safeties over the last couple of years have gotten pushed up the board. A lot of guys went higher than they probably should have been picked. Mark Barron's a great example of that.
Now he's playing linebacker.
I feel like Joseph is better than anybody you just named, though. Like, I think he's the best safety that's come out since Earl Thomas.
But injuries hurt him.
That's true. That's what I'm saying. Like, I don't think you have to take him at 17, but I think unlike pretty much anybody else that's come out in the last 5 years, he's the one guy that is actually worth that pick if he was healthy. But again, you don't have to. If he's not going to go until pick, 58, then you don't have to take him at 17. All right. Our next question comes from Rise Up Birds. He asks, who are some fast, good coverage linebackers in the draft that would be available after the first round that you guys like, if any?
I like Nick Vigil. Right off the top of my head, just a really fun guy to watch. As an inside linebacker. If he falls, Jalen Smith in the second round would be great. I think he's an excellent linebacker. Sua Cravens out of Southern Cal. Aaron keeps saying he's a safety. I like him as a linebacker. Again, Deion Jones out of LSU. Just kind of going through my notes here. Eric Stryker at Oklahoma. Fast, good in coverage. Undersized is the only real knock on him, but it's because he's short. I mean, also what happened with short linebackers like Chris Borland and Zach Thomas in the NFL.
I haven't done a whole lot of homework on the second and third tier linebackers. It's not that I don't think Sua Cravens can play linebacker. I just think in Atlanta's scheme, he's much closer to a strong safety than a weak side linebacker. I think in a lot of other schemes, he'd be a weak side linebacker. I think he'd be like a sub package, like what Barron is, basically like a sub package weak side linebacker. Deion Jones is a guy I think is talented. I don't really like people. Some people are talking about him like as a second round pick. I don't really see that. I think he's more of a third, fourth round guy. But I think if you draft him in like the third or fourth round, you'd be very happy. A day 3 guy that I have my eye on is Travis Feeney from Washington. He's like 6'4", maybe 225. He's more of a developmental guy, but I could see him sort of long-term being like a good developmental guy behind Durant. In a couple of years might be able to take over for Durant. I haven't really seen a ton of other guys, so not really anybody else that's on my radar. But again, as we get closer to the draft, I'll do more research. Okay. Evan Birchfield asks, if the Panthers win the Super Bowl, we're the only NFC South team without a ring. Big deal or no?
Who gives a shit?
I kind of feel the same way, Scott.
So Atlanta wasn't lucky enough to have a competent owner its first, 45 or 35 years? Once Blank bought the team, Blank said, oh, hey, I'm going to spend money and we're going to win games. So, yeah, I really don't give a shit. Great. When your team is owned by a former NFL player and it's just what the team is, go for it. That's great. I wish that the Falcons had Arthur Blank from the get-go.
Okay. No, I don't think it's not any big a deal than it was before the Panthers won the Super Bowl. I mean, the only reason it would be a big deal is if you like to talk shit to the Panthers fans, and basically if they win the Super Bowl, it's going to be a lot harder for you to talk shit to them, because they'll be like, we got rings, bitch. What do you got? But if you're not really a trash talker, then it doesn't really matter. It shouldn't, whether the Panthers win a Super Bowl shouldn't change your opinion about the Falcons for better or for worse. The Falcons haven't won a Super Bowl because the Falcons haven't won a Super Bowl. It has nothing to do with any other team. I think people spend way too much time thinking about what other teams are doing than they probably should. I'm one of those people, on Sundays when the Falcons lose, people are like, oh, Falcons lost, but at least the Saints lost, or at least the Panthers lost. I don't care whether the Saints, Panthers win games. All I care about is the Falcons win games. Doesn't bother me one bit that the Panthers won all those games this year. I didn't lose any sleep over that. That's them. They can do whatever, they do them and we'll do us. So I don't think it's a big deal.
Let's put it this way. I'm happy that the Falcons have an owner that gives a shit right now, because before Arthur Blank, the Falcons had 10 total playoff games. Since Arthur Blank, they've had 9. But Arthur Blank's only owned the team for 14 years. And before him, there was 36 years of crap. So.
Yeah, I mean, basically, if it bothers you that the Falcons haven't won a ring, then it should keep bothering you. Whether the Panthers win the Super Bowl or not shouldn't change it. If you're okay, I don't know if you're okay with it, but if you're not losing any sleep over the fact that the Falcons don't have a Lombardi trophy in their trophy case, then you probably shouldn't lose any more sleep than you have been losing for the last 50 years. So it doesn't really matter that much what the Panthers do. Okay. I think we answered Evans Birchfield's next question. It was about Raheem Morse. We talked about that early in the show. Last questions come from Digital Demon. He asked, will Brooks Reed be in Atlanta in 2018? And do we draft Scooby Wright or Jordan Jenkins in the 4th to replace him?
I don't think Jordan Jenkins lasts to the 4th, and I don't see the need for drafting a strong side linebacker with how Stupar played in the role last year. I think you just keep Stupar, and if Brooks Reed is on the team or not, then you just figure it out from there. But I don't think Brooks Reed is in Atlanta in 2018, no.
Yeah, I would be very surprised if Brooks Reed's still a Falcon in 2018. That would basically mean he was like a Pro Bowler in 2016. Because I don't think he's going to be a Falcon in 2017. I think he's, next year is going to be his last year. I think that's always been sort of the goal, or the plan at least. They signed him to a 5-year deal, but it was really structured to be a 2-year deal. And I think what you'll see next year, or kind of what I'm hoping next year, I think the Falcons solve their middle linebacker situation this offseason, whether that's signing Danny Trevathan or drafting Deron Lee or whoever they feel like solves it. Hopefully you get a long-term solution at middle linebacker this offseason. And I think next offseason you probably look to replace either one of those two starters in Reed or Durant. Probably Durant more likely, because I feel like you can probably fudge things. Strong side linebacker is not that important a position in the scheme because it's not a 2-down position unless you have a Bruce Irvin type of guy that can put heat on the pressure on 3rd downs. And between Tyler Starr, between Nate Stupar, between O'Brien Schofield, and whoever else we may pick up between now and the end of 2016, I think you probably will have a decent option to replace Brooks Reed at that spot, at least for 1 year. And then probably in the 2017 draft, you might look for that Bruce Irvin type of player, or the 2018 draft or whatever. You might look for that Bruce Irvin type of player that can be that 2-down linebacker. And maybe that's Vic Beasley. We don't necessarily know if Vic Beasley is going to be the long-term Leo. So I don't think the Falcons need to be looking at any strong side linebackers. Scooby Wright, I love his first name. Everybody keeps telling me he's not that good at football, so I haven't really watched him. But his name is Scooby. So that alone, having him and Nick Scrappy Williams, I think would be fun, at least on Twitter on Sundays. Jordan Jenkins, I like Jordan Jenkins. I'm with Scott. I think he'll probably go in the 3rd round. He might slide to the 4th round, but he'll probably go in the 3rd round. So, and I think he's probably more of a D end than a strong side linebacker. So, all right. Our last question also comes from Digital Demon. He asks, "What would both of your ideal drafts as of right now? What would be both of your ideal drafts as of right now?"
Atlanta takes talented players, and as far as who's who, where, all that, trying to do an ideal draft in January is like trying to hit a bullseye with a rifle going 90 miles an hour down the highway. Like, it's not even worth trying.
Okay.
Last year, I'd say Vic Beasley was a 2nd-round pick, and Atlanta should be taking Randy Gregory. And by the time the draft came around, I was like, man, if Atlanta could get Vic Beasley and Randy Gregory with their first 2 picks, that'd be great.
Yeah.
90 miles down the highway. Can't hit that bullseye.
Yeah, I think, whether the ideal draft is a realistic draft, my ideal draft is somehow magically Miles Jack is our pick. I think he's the best player in the draft.
Him or
So I think ideal, that's one pick. As I've said before, I'm a big fan of Carl Joseph. I think he's one of the better safety prospects to come out in the last 5 years. So I would put him in there and put him at free safety. Another edge rusher, a guard that can come in, have a redshirt year and then immediately come in and play at a high level in 2017, somewhere in the third or fourth round. And maybe some long-term developmental tight end in that same range. Next year's tight end class is supposed to be really good, so it's not as if the Falcons have to take a tight end this year. But, that's kind of where my head is at. And, getting some speed wide receiver in the middle rounds as well. I don't know. We'll have to find out. But, yeah, it's January. It's a long way off. What the ideal is, as Scott said, ultimately the ideal is get good players. That's the ideal draft. Get like 5 good players. Realistically, you'll probably only get like 2, maybe 3, but ideally you can get like 5. All right, let me make sure we got all those questions answered. It looks like we did. All right, folks, we appreciate you guys hanging out with us for almost 2 hours, it looks like. I guess this is what happens when you take a week off. You have a lot of stuff you got to get to. Scott, we're going to be back next week?
Probably 2 weeks again.
Okay. So, we'll be back in 2 weeks. You guys got 2 weeks to think of some of those awesome mailbag questions. Use the hashtag Falcons mailbag to get those to us. You can tweet at the show at Falcons PFC. You can tweet at me at FalcFans. You can tweet at Scott at Karasik S. Be sure to subscribe and rate us on iTunes. You can find us, just go to iTunes and search Pro Football Central or whatnot, or Falcon Central Radio. Give us a thumbs up on YouTube or whatever. I think that's pretty much everything. You got anything on the pipe at the Falcoholic, Scott, that people should be looking out for?
I do. I've got an article that's going to be coming out probably tomorrow about the Falcons' current cap situation.
Okay, there you go. And I don't have anything immediately planned for FalcFans.com, but I'm sure I'll be writing some stuff in the next couple of days. So, stay tuned to that. So we appreciate you guys checking us out, and anybody that's still alive right now, still watching us. I won't delay this anymore. So we'll see you guys in 2 weeks.